I have worked the Promenade level of Vicar Station for 11 years. Cargo brokerage mostly, transit manifests, rerouting fees, quiet facilitation of goods that prefer not to be inspected too closely. I know every face that passes through regularly, every shade of trouble before it becomes trouble. My secondary arms developed early the habit of folding inward when I sense something off. A pressure response, my species calls it. The body knowing before the mind catches up. The old human had been sitting at Moret's counter stall for 2 hours before the Solrath crew noticed him. I noticed him the moment I arrived for my morning rounds, which tells you something. He occupied the end seat at Moret's low prep counter, a place usually taken by dock workers grabbing something hot before a shift, and he was eating a bowl of gray grain mash with the focused, unhurried attention of someone who had nowhere better to be and no particular interest in the fact. He was old by human standards, or what I understood of them. The hair on his head had gone the color of cooled slag. His face was a country of old decisions, lined deep, the kind that don't come from age alone. He wore a long travel duster, the color of worn stone, and a kit bag that had been patched so many times the patches had patches. No insignia, no visible weapons, nothing that announced itself. That was the first thing I noticed. Not the duster or the bag or the face, the way he sat. The stool gave him a full sight line to 3 of the 4 corridor approaches, without him having to move his head. His back was to the wall, not the kitchen. He had positioned himself the way you position yourself when you have learned, in some very definitive way, that back to the kitchen is how people get surprised. He wasn't doing anything with the information. He was just eating. But the position was there, settled and automatic, the way breathing is settled and automatic. My secondary arms folded in. The Solrath crew arrived at the 9th hour, which was their usual time. 4 of them. Yellow glowing eyes, the lot of them. A trait specific to their strain of mercenary caste. Pigment, a byproduct of a gland that produces a mild combat stimulant on demand. They wore it like a flag. Draven, the crew leader, was the largest, scoring across his jaw armor from blade arguments he had won. The other filled space around him, the way debris orbits a larger body. Most of the promenade gave them room. They worked a young Velhari courier first. Something quick to establish tone, and then one of the 3, the one I knew only as Prit, spotted the old human at the counter. I watched Prit say something to Draven. Draven looked. Something in his posture shifted. Not wariness, not yet, just the recalibration of appetite. He saw an old traveler eating alone, back to the crowd, kit bag on the floor beside him. He saw an easy transaction, something to take the edge off before they moved on to their scheduled business. They moved toward the counter in a loose 4-point spread. I did not move. I held my position at the cargo terminal 6 meters away and watched, because I could not have told you why. My secondary arms were folded so tight they ached. Draven put a hand on the old human's shoulder. Not a tap, a placement, the kind that says, "I am here, you are aware of me, and now we discuss what I want." The old human did not flinch, did not look up, continued eating. He lifted the spoon, moved a portion of the mash to his mouth, set the spoon down again with the quiet click of someone who has finished a thought and is beginning the next one. Draven squeezed. I could see the pressure from 6 meters away, the way the duster fabric bunched under his grip. Nothing. Moved around to the human's left. Another of the crew, the one they called Shek, stepped in close on the right, near enough that the human would have to turn his head to look at him directly. 4th positioned himself at the corridor side, blocking the obvious exit. Standard. I had seen them run this exact geometry on a dozen marks. The old human ate. Draven leaned down and said something close to the human's ear. I was too far to hear the words. I did not need to. I knew the words from the posture. What you have and how quickly you hand it over. The human set his spoon down. Not quickly, not slowly. Set it. Down the way you set something down when you're finished with it. And he picked up the small cup of hot liquid Meret had set beside the bowl, and he drank from it. That was all. That was his response. There is a particular quality of stillness that is different from the stillness of someone who is afraid. Fear makes a body rigid in a specific way. The breath shortens, the joints lock. There is a quality of compression, of the body trying to make itself small. What I was watching was not that. The old human's shoulders were loose. His breathing, as near as I could observe, was unchanged. He was not performing calm for the benefit of the crew. He simply had not registered them as a situation requiring adjustment. That is not a thing you can fake. I have watched enough genuinely dangerous people in 11 years on the promenade to know the difference between someone who is holding themselves together and someone for whom the arithmetic of 4 armed mercenaries does not change any variable that matters to them. Crew did not know this yet. Draven's hand tightened further. Prit produced a short blade, holding it low and angled, not a threat display, professional prompt. The old human turned his head, not toward Draven, not toward Prit and the blade. He turned his head slowly to look at the 4th crew member, the one blocking the corridor exit. As if the other 3 were not particularly interesting and the 4th had done something mildly worth noting. He looked at the 4th for 3 long seconds. The 4th, whose name I did not know, took a step back. I saw it happen, and I could not have told you exactly why it happened, only that something in that look had communicated something, clearly and without ambiguity. That made a step back seem like the correct response. It was in that moment that I noticed the 5th presence at the counter, Essa, the oldest of the Sulrith affiliates, not a fighter, their logistics coordinator, a mottled green stalker strain male, who had come in through the service corridor and had been standing at the far end of counter with a transit docket in hand, waiting for Moret, not yet part of the scene. Essa had gone completely still. Not the stillness of waiting. The stillness of someone who has just processed a piece of information and is trying very quickly to decide what to do with it. His eyes were fixed on the old human's kit bag, specifically on a faded patch near the lower clasp. Something stitched in a color that had once been bright and was now the same gray as everything else the old human wore. A unit marker, I realized later, though I did not recognize it then. Essa moved to Draven's side in 2 fast, quiet steps and said something directly into the crew leader's ear. Draven did not respond immediately. I watched his hand, still on the human's shoulder, and I watched it open, and I watched him take it back. No explanation to his crew. He simply stepped away from the counter and tilted his head, and the 4 of them withdrew. Prit put the blade away. The one who had stepped back was already 3 meters down the corridor. Within 30 seconds, the crew was gone from the promenade entirely. Not hurried, deliberate. The way you leave a place, when leaving quickly, would telegraph that you had been somewhere you should not have been. The old human finished his drink. He reached into his duster, produced a small coin, a physical denomination, old style, not a credit chip, and placed it on the counter beside the bowl. He picked up his kit bag by the strap without looking at it, settled it onto his shoulder in the movement of long practice, and walked away from the counter at the same unhurried pace at which he had been sitting. He did not look at the corridor the crew had taken. He did not look around the promenade. He walked toward the transit gates, the way a man walks to a gate he has already decided on, and he was gone. I crossed to Essa before he could leave, put a hand on his arm, secondary, carefully, and I asked him what he had seen. What was the patch? What did it mean? Essa looked at me for a moment. His expression was difficult to read, which was unusual. Stalker-strained faces tend to broadcast clearly. Then he said 4 words. 7th reach. Class 16. He pulled his arm free, gently, and walked toward the service corridor without looking back. I stood on the promenade for some time after that. The grain mash bowl was still on Moret's counter. The coin was beside it. Old metal, worn smooth by years of hands. I have worked this station for 11 years. I have seen things I do not discuss at cargo terminals. I have not taken the end seat at Moret's counter since. Not because I expect him back, but because the position is taken now, in some way I cannot fully explain, and I find I prefer the stool with my back to the kitchen,